These Creditors in Commerce workshop sessions, hereinafter sessions, are the private exchange of ideas and concepts between the providers and the recipients. The content is not meant as legal advice. The use or attempted use of any idea or procedure discussed in these sessions, as applied to the recipient's own personal transactions, cases, or controversies, or applied to other cases, may or may not result in a favorable outcome or the same outcome as discussed in these sessions. Each transition or transaction, case, or controversy may be different as a result of unique actions or unique statements made by the parties therein, and each different act or statement in any transaction affects or may affect whether any procedure or idea discussed in these sessions is relevant to the recipient's transactions, or that the outcome thereof will be depicted as in these sessions. The discussion of ideas or procedures in these sessions is not exhaustive of the subjects being discussed. Many ideas and concepts that can affect the outcome of any legal or commercial procedure are not discussed in these sessions, and the fact that the recipients may not be aware of these issues may have an adverse effect on the outcome of the recipient's procedures. It is the responsibility of the recipients to understand their own transactions and to apply the appropriate and complete concepts necessary for a procedural and substantive remedy thereto. These sessions may be redistributed privately by any recipient to another recipient requesting them, condition upon the fact that this notice is provided therewith. If you have any questions, you may contact Creditors in Commerce by email at harmony@creditorsincommerce.com.
Okay, and the private trust here, that trust was induced by Mom's application for a birth certificate. And what it did is it took the estate of the young child and pledged it to the national government. What was it that the founding fathers did when they decided to go against England in war? What did they pledge? They pledged their lives, their sacred honor, all of their estates and properties to do what? Create a nation. Are you being asked to pledge anything more or less? Your estates, your sacred honor, everything was pledged through the birth certificate, just like the founding fathers, to support and make a great nation. But it took away your estate, so as a living man or woman, you own nothing. It's all gone. It's into a different entity. You are a pauper. You have nothing.
So say you.
It was gone. Well, we got a man that will argue, but okay.
Sayest thou this thing of thyself?
What happened here, we said that because of the taking of the gold and silver, there was no lawful money, so none of the property could be held in legal title. However, when Mom set up this trust, the documents got filed into the public. And so what it did is it pulled the trust down below the line, putting it in the democracy. Once it's in the democracy, remember we said if you showed up in court and said, "Yep, boss, I'm here," didn't you just voluntarily appear? And under the second, 13th article and amendment, doesn't that mean that you turned over the property voluntarily and brought it into servitude, right? So by filing the documents for the birth certificate in public, that trust went down into the public. Now, the government does not want to appear to have taken all of your estate away from you. So what did the government do? It made your mom and dad the trustees over your estate by appointment. Your legal guardian is the trustee of your estate because you were under the age of majority and you could not control your own estate, could you? So mom and dad were the trustees. But where are they operating? in the public. Once you became 18 years of age, what happened? You replaced your parents as the trustee of your own trust. So for all practical purposes, doesn't it look like you're dealing with everything that you're entitled to? Don't they send your paychecks for the straw man? Because he's the one that signed up working for General Motors, not you. But don't they send the paycheck for your straw man to you? Because you're the trustee for the trust. Is it your paycheck? No. Whose is it? It's the trust. Does your straw man have to file a 1040 return? Yeah. Why does he have to file a 1040 return? Go back to the Tax Act of 1890s, Pollock. Didn't the Supreme Court say that a general tax on corporations is 100% constitutional? And to the extent that the Tax Act of Congress in the 1880s and early 1890s levied a tax generally on corporations, it's constitutional. But when the Congress levied a tax on people, that is unconstitutional. So Congress goes, okay. So what did they do? They went back, and in the early 1900s, 1909, they passed a new Corporate Tax Act. And then they came out with the 16th article and amendment that said that tax on income from whatever source derived, they can tax. And the Supreme Court came out and said, well, we think that the tax now that's being levied in the manner that this last case came in is 100% constitutional, and the Congress has not changed any of the taxing over the old theories. What did Congress do? They levied a tax on what? Not the income, but the methodology by which the income is derived. So what they did is when they induced you to be through a birth certificate, then they changed your operations in commerce in 1933 to hire your straw man, which is like a corporation. What did they say about a general income tax on corporations? 100% constitutional. They're not taxing your property. You surrendered your property when you were brought into the trust because it's not your property. The property belongs to the trust. It's the straw man trust that is working, and the payments in wages to your straw man automatically go into the trust because your mother forfeit those payments from ever going to you. And so the tax is on the methodology of earning the income through a fiction of law, which is the trust, instead of you personally as a living man or woman. So is the tax 100% constitutional and legal? As long as they're levying it on the straw man. They didn't change law. They can't change substantive law. They changed the procedure by which you got to operate, and you're ignorant enough to know that you're not operating as a living man or woman. You forfeit your estate when you were born. You've never reclaimed it, and they're just taxing the corporation for which you're a beneficiary. But the corporation has to pay the tax first. Okay, so what happened is you are presumed to be the legal title holder of a trust. Who the hell is the beneficiary up there? Well, why did they induce you to become a trust? Because they wanted this registered with the state, right? Because if you registered the collateral with the state, based on the constitutional provision that the state would have to share the assets with the national government to set off the debt, then by your relationship with the state, by filing the birth certificate, the state could carry your estate into a beneficial interest to help underwrite the national government. So who is the beneficiary in box 3 of the private estate? alien property custodian of the United States of America.
The Secretary of the Treasury.
When the hell did they create him? Trading with the Enemy Act in the 1917s, which applied only to the enemies. What did FDR do when he came in and declared bankruptcy? He made every citizen of the United States included within the Trading with the Enemy Act.
Made United States citizens.
So all the straw men are enemies of the United States. What do you need to do to operate as an enemy of the United States and be legal? You got to register yourself and get permission. Isn't a license permission to do that which is illegal, unlawful, or a tort or whatever? So as long as your straw men are registered, they're okay. They're exempt from the Trading with the Enemy Act. But as the foreign alien property custodian, they have claimed all of the assets in your estate to help finance the national government. Next slide. Okay, one of the things that we're doing with the birth certificate, what you got to learn to do is as long as it's registered down in the public, that is a public legal trust and a public equitable trust. And so one of the things that you've got to do to reclaim private rights, what do you do with a certificate if you want to get the rights back? You've got to turn it back in. It's like a claim check. And so in order to restore your rights, you've got to turn in your birth certificate. Who do you turn it into? Well, in this case, isn't it a commercial interest? So it's got to go back to somebody associated with Treasury. But you see, one of the things that you're going to do is you got to come back and move from the public to the private. How do you do that? UCC1 filing? What are you doing when you're making an initial UCC1 filing? You're giving public notice of what?
Security interest.
A separation of entities. That an entity is separate from some other entity. And so the living man is a separate entity from the straw man. So the evidence that's going in on a properly filed UCC1 is to show in the public record that there's two separate entities, living man, straw man.
And when you hear me talk about it, because I like to make a distinction, since in commerce there's no living men, there's natural persons. See, we a lot of times associate living man as the natural person. It's the private trust. So there's a dual capacity there. You're the trustee of the private trust. Your private trust is the trustee of the public trust.
We're going to show you the two boxes that is in a minute, but Brandon's absolutely right. The private trust is actually box 2. And that's going to be separate from the beneficiary straw man, which is going to be in box 6. We'll show you in a while. So what you're doing with the UCC filing is you're showing two separate entities which under the rules of evidence appear in their record form, showing that one of the entities, box 2, is a creditor, one of the entities, box 6, is a debtor. You need to have the two entities, one being in the republic and one in the democracy, because you cannot have a creditor in the democracy. So the filing is a legislative notice of the separation of two parties, both appearing to have the same name, but legally and commercially being separate legal entities. Okay? Next slide. Okay, go on. We've covered that one. Okay, go on. There are 3 parties that are trustees of the rights and the assets in the private. Under Title 22 of the United States Code, which deals with international issues, you have the Secretary of State, U.S., Attorney General, U.S., and Secretary of the Treasury, U.S. Do you understand? None of those three positions are elected by any U.S. citizens. Do you understand they're appointed positions? Do you understand, most importantly, that under the provisions of international law, in order for these three people to fill the capacity of those positions, they must expatriate their U.S. citizenship? Why is that important? Because the United States is a corporation operating below the line. And the U.S. corporation below the line cannot appear above the line. And yet they need trustees to represent the substance of the people's assets, so the people have a remedy. So the most important people in your life in government, if you choose to act in the capacity of a sovereign, is not Congress, not your local legislature. It's the Secretary of Treasury, U.S., Secretary of State, U.S., and Attorney General, U.S. That's your remedy under private international law. There is no sovereign nation left to go to. There are no unalienable rights recognized by original documentation that's going to protect you. You have your rights under private international law, which is a restatement of the laws of nature, where nature's God and creator has extended those rights to you as his creation. You don't get your rights from man-made government. Next slide. Under the Secretary of Treasury, you have three agencies. None of these agencies are U.S. government agencies. The agencies that we're most importantly care about is the DTC, the FRB, and the IRS. The Depository Trust Company is legislative. The Federal Reserve Banking System is executive. And the Internal Revenue Service is judicial in administrative procedures to give you your remedy. They are your best friends and your only friends. If you are fighting or arguing with any of these agencies, you are in deep doo-doo because you're screwing up your remedy. Next slide. There is a corresponding public trust below the line. There is a grantor, a trust, and trustee, and beneficiary. The beneficiary is your straw man. He receives all of the public benefits to sustain life. In the public, they never see a living man or woman. There is nothing you're doing in current society that recognizes you as a living man or woman. Everything that comes to you and goes from you goes through your straw man corporation.
In the public.
In the public.
Now, they had to create that entity in private international law by contracting with your private trust.
These are a parallel. We want to give you the impression that the private trust must work in harmony with the public trust. If the private trust is not in harmony with the public trust, something's screwed up and you're going to see a problem. It's only with complete harmony between the public and the private sector is it going to run smoothly and everybody's going to be happy as a lark. Notice that the living man has something to do with box 1, box 2, and box 6. As we're going to complete the government cycle here in a minute, the government has something to do with box 4, box 5, and box 3. Isn't that a mirror image between the public and the private? Isn't it a mirror image between people and government? If you're working in harmony, you're not going to have a problem. Most of the people in life are what? Ostriches with their head in the ground. Don't want to see, don't want to think, don't want to care, just want to follow everybody's orders so I stay out of trouble. Does it work pretty good for them? Usually. Does that mean that they're not complaining? Nope, doesn't mean that. They'll bitch up a storm. But will they ever get off their damn ass and take their head out of the ground to do anything? No. And if the law enforcement officer shows up, they may be yelling and screaming, but they will comply. If they don't comply, they'll go to jail, and the next time either they want to go back to jail again or they will comply because they're going to learn to be in harmony and do what they're told in order to have an easygoing life, and that's what most people want to do. Don't rock the boat. Does that mean they're happy? Oh, hell no, but they won't get off their ass and do anything. What's stage 2? Somebody wakes up, they take the red pill. Doesn't make any difference what they see. It might be government. Oh, man, that's screwed up. Might be healthcare. Oh, boy, that's screwed up. Maybe business. Hey, man, they're only in it for a profit. They aren't helping their customers. That's screwed up. Maybe the church. My God, you know those Christians, they're wacko. They don't preach or they don't do what they preach. That's screwed up. Just isn't about everything in the public screwed up if you just go down and analyze it? Yeah? And so immediately, whatever it is you researched and you found out it was screwed up, how did you react? Boy, we got to correct that. We got to change that. Did you spend the next X number of years of your life trying to change the world so that everybody starts doing it the right way because you're the only one in the world that noticed that they screwed something up? And since I have been enlightened, it's my job. It's my God-given duty to convince the world to change, right? What the hell's going to happen to you as you get old? You going to accomplish any change? Nope. You going to be bitter? Probably. You going to be happy? Nope. See, you may be a domestic terrorist. Because damn, that government's going to restore the republic. Let me ask you a question. Do you really think God created and is in control? You think if he wanted it changed, it would have been changed? Well, if it wasn't changed, why didn't he change it? Maybe it's supposed to be the way it is right now for some reason. Remember, doesn't Scripture say, God, help me to understand that which I have power to do and change? And then go do it. But if I don't have the power to change, get me the hell out of there. It's not my job. Okay? So the problem with going into stage 2 is you want to change everybody else to be like you. Didn't Brandon talk about that this morning? Your job isn't to change. Can you change anyone? You can change one person. Wow. So if you're in stage 2 and you're rebelling, look in the mirror. You got to correct your position. And if you correct your position, you're going to go into stage 3, which is what? What are we talking about doing? Being creditors? What is creditor? Someone who teaches by example by helping people that are in stage 1 and 2 that have a problem, and by example help them solve their problem. Are you in rebellion? Are you a terrorist if you're in that position? Are you happy if you're in that position because you're working within your capacity, doing what it is that you've got a gift to do? And by setting an example, that's the best you can possibly do by influencing everyone around you to change their life by changing themselves to be examples to others. You're going to learn to pay it forward instead of compelling them to pay it back. You're acting like a creditor.
I think it was Gandhi who said, be the change you want to see in the world.
There you go. So what we got going on here is, look, isn't everything that the public doing to produce goods and services? To do what? To help the beneficiary. Isn't that what trustees do? And the beneficiaries of the public trust are our straw man corporations. Now, if this government were actually a republic, what would this map look like? It would look like box 1 right where it is, box 2 right where it is, and box 6 up at box 3. That wouldn't even be a trust anymore, would it? That would be you, and everything you accumulated that God gave you in your life would go to you as a beneficiary. But you see, what the government did and the bankers did is separated this. You still are the beneficiary, but you got to go through the permission of the government now. And they will give you your benefits.
And it just may be that this is a mirror image of what is possible for us to build for a functional society. A republic that operates only above the line and without trust. Think about that little pairing of words right there, without trust. Doesn't mean that it's functional. Doesn't mean that that's going to be your remedy. Because without trust
is anarchy.
Exactly.
You want to be in a republic with anarchy and everybody around doing their own thing?
Because that's what it is. It's self-governance.
Stealing from you and beating you up at night and taking away your assets? Is that what you want?
That's the world we lived in prior to what we have now. Now, there is another possibility, but it requires a shift in consciousness, a paradigm shift that we've been talking about, where I'm no longer coming from what's in it for me. I'm no longer coming from there's not enough. I'm no longer coming from hoarding because of my sense that there's not enough and scarcity. I need, in order to create a functional society, I need to create trust. I need to create balance and abundance through operating not in a way that's what's in it for me, meaning I don't go around doing because of what I'm going to get in return, but I go around creating for the benefit of all my brothers and sisters and have faith that all I need will be provided to me. And as this shift in consciousness happens and we all start to direct our energy in how can I serve the brothers and sisters around me, and all of them start doing the same thing, we'll all be taken care of. But see, what that requires is trust and faith. And that's really where greed is born, is that lack of faith, that sense of scarcity, which isn't necessarily true. It's what we make up, that there's not enough. So start to at least toy with the idea that another paradigm is possible, because as your consciousness rises, as you start to toy with these thoughts and ideas of operating from a non-profit sensibility, meaning I'm not doing this for what's in it for me, I'm doing this to be of service to others. And as others start to be of service to others, we start to create a system that is generative as opposed to degenerative. We start to create something that is abundant as opposed to scarce. So this model is perfect for us to really wrap our heads around, not necessarily being sovereign. We want to be sovereign, but we want to be sovereign in the sense of being in service. I mean, look at our past. What happens when a sovereign is only concerned with themselves?
He's a tyrant.
He's a tyrant, and the masses starve and go without. But if a sovereign treats all others as sovereigns and comes from a place of how can I be of service to my brother and sister sovereigns, we can completely turn this paradigm upside down and make and create something beautiful, something in harmony, something in balance. But it takes a shift in consciousness. There is no how-to map for this. Because until it's born in your heart and consciousness of a way of being in service to others, we can't bring it about in our reality. So remember we were talking about being a creditor being a practice that you take on in your life? Start to take that on at a personal level. How can you be in service to your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your cousins, your uncles, your neighbors, your friends, strangers? How can you be in service? I don't mean give them money. That's not necessarily being in service. We have to get out of the idea that money, especially in the form of Federal Reserve notes, fixes problems. Who's the source of the solutions? What's the source of solutions? We are. So let's start to foster an idea that we can be in service to each other. There's a gentleman who, this is probably the first workshop he hasn't been at since we started doing workshops. And he never asked for a benefit in the sense that it's not that he's got a lot of resources, but every time he comes, he's not only donating to our cause and so that we can create more, but he's not just sitting there receiving either. He comes here, donates the money to be here, and then the entire time he's here, he's in service to the space. He'll go back, grab microphones, and when someone starts talking, he'll run over and hand them a microphone. He's just naturally coming from a place of being in service and creating. And if we all start to take on this in every aspect of our lives, like think about it, in your work environment, how can I be in service to my fellow employees if I'm an employee? If I'm a service provider, rather than looking at it, how can I make money, how can I be in service to my community? You'll be able to build very successful businesses if your come from is, what's the need? How can I serve? If that's your focus, your value goes way up. Because it's not the bottom line you're focused on. How can I squeeze as many dollars as I can out of my clients? My focus is, how can I be of the most service to my clients? How can I serve them the best? And in that sense, that's how I look to run what we do. That's why I drove across the country with all this equipment. Because if we'd have paid to have this equipment here, we'd have had to charge double the donation to let you in here. It just wouldn't have happened. So how can I be in service? I'll drive 34 hours, actually 41 hours. It should have only been 34, but I had to rest. But so rather I drove it to get it here to be of service. Gordon, Jack, they're always in service. I can call any of them at any time. They're not going to say, well, Brandon, it's going to cost you. They can call me at any time. And I'm not telling them, well, Gordon, it's going to cost you. Yeah, now everybody's got Gordon's number.
It's going to cost you.
But it's something we can practice every day. It's something that we can look at in every aspect of our lives. It's such a wonderful thing to be with friends, family, loved ones in a way of being in service to them. It's one of the most rewarding things you can do. And have faith that you will always be provided for. Because when you hit hard times and you've been nothing but in service to all those around you, you know how easy it is to ask for support? This economic crisis that this country is facing is a blessing. Because it's waking everyone up to what's really important. We're afraid to ask for support when we're losing our house. Why? Because we never gave any support. Why should anybody give us any? But if all we ever do is serve, 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 when we need the support, we're not ashamed to ask for it. I need support. Can you support me? And if you're the person who's constantly in service, watch. People will jump to serve you. I know this from my experience. It's funny because I'm constantly pushing it away, people wanting to serve. And that's not serving me. Because in pushing away people wanting to serve my endeavors, I'm actually restricting how much I can serve. And that's clogging the flow of what comes in. When you're restricting what comes in, you're also restricting what can go out. When you're restricting what goes out, you're going to restrict what comes in. You got a cash flow problem? Look at that. Because cash is just a representation of your energy. How are you giving it? How are you receiving it? Because it's not bad to receive. If we start to look at everything that we give and receive as gifts, we operate in the world of exemption. You realize that? That's why the IRS itself has even structured its code such that when you're coming from a place of we're gifting our service, we're gifting everything we do, and all we receive as support are gifts, you're exempt. They won't touch you. Because you're not harming the community, you're benefiting it. They recognize that. That's why you're exempt. So even in the democracy, this system could fully function if we chose to come from a place of abundance as opposed to scarcity. If we chose to come from a place of being in service to others as opposed to being in service to ourselves. Just an idea, just a principle, but something that can profoundly transform the world if that's what you choose. Because in reality, there's nothing wrong with the world. It's whole, perfect, and complete the way that it is. There's nothing wrong with any of you. You're whole, perfect, and complete the way you are. There's nothing wrong. Now, I have a preference. My preference is to have peace, abundance, and love in the world. Not saying that it's not there, because it is. There's plenty of peace. There's peace in this room right now. There's plenty of love. It's all over the world. And every resource is in abundance. And I choose to see that and to come from that place. And when I choose to come from that place and to see that as the reality, I can manifest it. Not that I'm attached to it being different. See, notice I use the word transformation as opposed to change. Change suggests that there's something wrong. There's nothing wrong. I have preference, but I'm not attached to it. I'm not going to go fight for peace. I mean, what a ridiculous concept. I'm going to go fight for peace. I'm going to go fight for love, right? So, just an idea, just a concept. This is really, in my opinion, what this is all about. When I get and I come from that space of transformation of myself, of being in service to others, I know naturally it will multiply and reflect from all those around me. Like I said, when I'm coming from that space, it's all around me. Everyone around me wants to be in service to me because I want to be in service to them. It's just natural that way. It's like a reciprocity, right? You know, you've heard of the universal laws and the law of attraction and things like that. It's born from within. When I transform, the world transforms. So maybe Gandhi should have said, be the transformation you want to see in the world. Because there's nothing wrong with it the way that it is. If you see something wrong, look inside. What about you are you projecting into the world that sees that there's a problem? You see injustice, how are you unjust? You see greed, how are you greedy? Right? You would not have the distinction of it and be able to see it if it didn't live inside of you. You would have no recognition of it. You've heard the story about Mother Teresa when the war protesters wanted her to march against war. And you think, oh, it's Mother Teresa, of course. She's going to march against war. And she told them, absolutely not. When you have a march for peace, I'll join. But I will not stand against war. She chooses not to see the war. She doesn't have war inside of her. All she sees is that every human being is whole, perfect, and complete. And all she sees is being in service to all of those beings. So why create war in her life when she could always be at peace and coming from a place of peace and creating peace in the world? So you may think you're here to learn some procedures because you don't have the answers. I'm telling you, you have the answers. You have everything you need inside you already. It's there. It's literally just changing that mindset and that come from.
Now let's wind this up here pretty quick. There's a couple more things I want to show. Number one, public trustees, box 5. Those are all elected and appointed government officials. They include attorneys. They include you because you are allegedly the public trustee over your straw man account. Unless you've privatized it to take it back again, which a good chance most of you have not yet done. Remember, who has a duty to file the 1040 return? Trustees reporting what kind of transactions went on with regard to public corporations and properties. So it also includes all of the officials, top officials of what we might call private corporations, but weren't all those private corporations licensed in the public side of government? Aren't they operating in the democracy, or is General Motors paying everybody with gold and silver up there in the Republic? So you see, there's everything that is included in commerce today is operating below the line here in the democracy as part of the trustees. Who is the grantor in box 4? Well, remember, what is the definition of the United States? Isn't it a commercial corporation? And what is it that creates the commercial corporation? Isn't it the infusion of capital stock into the corporation? So the public side of the Federal Reserve System, the banking system, is what is the grantor of the public trust because it puts into this collective commercial society the funding to carry out all of commerce. Remember when we started the bailouts at the end of 2008 and George Bush, and he said we had a serious problem? Who is it that got control over all of the money, the $700 billion? Pardon? Federal Reserve. Wasn't it under the Secretary of Treasury? Where did that currency come from? From the private trusts, box 3. What was the source of those assets? The estates built up by the people. The Secretary of Treasury got that $700 billion. What did he do with it? Distributed it. Who did he distribute it to? To the banks. It was a bailout of the banks. What do you mean a bailout of the bank? Well, the United States corporation just about bit the big one. And so they had to infuse the corporation with new cash. So they gave it to the grantor in box 4. The banks. Did they give you any? No, you're not a grantor. A couple of months later, some of the newspapers went back to the banks and said, "What did you do with the bailout money?" What were they told? None of your business. Get the hell out of here. One of the interesting things about a trust does not require full disclosure, particularly to the beneficiaries. So the bankers got the $700 billion. How much have they doled out so far? Third, less than a third of it. Ooh, they're holding it, aren't they? Get to that in a minute. The grantors could have passed it on to the public trustees, which includes, did General Motors get some? Did Chrysler? Because we have to empower the trustees to keep the goods and services coming down for the benefit of the beneficiaries. Were public works involved? Yeah. But basically, that's about the limit on where the bailouts have gone. And so the trustees have the duty of organizing and regulating and controlling everything in the economy to provide goods and services for the strawman beneficiaries. Does this model appear to be anything like probably what's going on today in our society? So it's kind of a roadmap to see what's happening here. Now, we could go back and using this roadmap, we could use it to analyze what happens in private court cases. We could look at other aspects of it. For instance, the estate goes to the alien property custodian in box 3, right? What is theft under the common law? Taking something that doesn't belong to you and not giving it back or compensating the party? How come the government just took all of our estate? Did the government give you anything back? What did the government give you back?
Set off.
Benefits and privileges through which box?
Box
6, but that's on the public side. Well, wait a minute. They took my real assets in the republic, and they're giving me some benefits and privilege that isn't even to me. It's to my straw man, for crying out loud, which isn't even mine. They control and own that sucker. So where'd the benefit come back to me? In the republic. Did they steal from me? Did government do something wrong? Did they violate the laws of nature?
No.
No. What haven't we shown you on this map yet? The what? Remedy. What is the remedy? What did government give you in place of taking your whole estate? HAR 192? The government said, because we've got all your assets, we will discharge all your debts dollar for dollar if you bring them to us. Let me get this straight. Why do you accumulate assets? What are we entitled to? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Can you pursue happiness without acquiring play toys, vacations, other things?
Yes.
And in commerce, doesn't that require usually to pay something or compensate something? Well, then you accumulate assets in order that your pursuit of happiness can go in whatever direction you want it to go, as long as it's legal or lawful, and no matter what it costs, as long as I can compensate the other party for what I take, right? So they took your assets, so what did they say? Just go pursue your happiness, but boss, I can't pay for it. You got my assets. Don't worry. We'll pay every penny of whatever pursuit of happiness you've got. If you've got a bill or a statement, send it to us and we'll set it off dollar for dollar. Oh, I don't need to have any assets then if you're going to pay all my bills. Wow, that's awesome, isn't it? They're going to pay all my bills. How many people got a statement for electric utility last month? Did the Treasury pay it for you? No? Why not?
Got one over here, did.
Why didn't they pay it? Didn't you ask them? Well, why didn't you ask them? Did you want to forfeit that benefit? Forfeiting the benefit is voluntary, isn't it? Can you volunteer to be a slave under Exodus 21:5? Sure. So don't have the government pay your utility bill then. Do you remember what your statement looked like? Remember, they've got names and a bunch of numbers on there, and they usually have a statement and an attached coupon, right? Now, the rules of accounting is dual accounting. There is asset side accounting and liability side accounting, right? Okay, did they send you a bill or a statement? Thank God they didn't send you a bill. They'd have been charging their brother. They never billed you. They sent you a statement. What's the difference? Statement tells you the condition of the account at the end of the 30 days. What did they show you on a statement, a credit or a debit? A credit. It was a positive number on the right-hand side. Anything on the right-hand side is a credit. Anything on the left-hand side is a debit, as long as it's a positive number. So they said, here's your electric utility, 85.34. Was that a positive number? Yes. Was it on the right-hand side of the page? Yes. They just sent you a credit for 85.34. What did you do with that? Did you send them a check? Did you send them a check for 85.34? Let me ask you a question. What kind of money were you paying with out of the checking account? Was it an asset or a liability? So you sent them minus 85.34. When they got your check for minus, because it's evidence of a debt, 85.34, and they merged it with your statement, which gave you a plus credit for 85.34, what did the statement balance show at the beginning of the statement on your next statement? Zero, because you just erased the credit they gave you by giving them a liability.
And you just increase the national debt by 85.
Good job,
34.
all you slaves. Are you idiots still coming from what we talked about this morning, this comfortable little belief system? Or are you operating on reality? What is the matter with you people?
We'll do better.
Thank God. Oh, we can go home then with peace. Because we got a class that's coming alive. Now, in reality, that's not what happened. They didn't take your negative and apply it against your credit and wipe out your credit. You know what they did?
Novation.
They did novation. What is novation? Substitution of one debt for another. Here's what they did. You send them a check for minus 85.04. That was a liability. It was a debt. Now, when they sent you the statement, they said, you owe us 85.04. Is that what the statement showed? No, the statement showed a credit for 85.04. Well, then why the hell did they say you owe us that? Because it's a dual bookkeeping accounting system. They showed you the credit, but they said, well, but you got another liability over here that's yet unpaid.
It just happens to be the same amount as your credit.
Same amount as the credit, and it's off the books. Now, if you authorize them to use the credit to set off the liability, the account would have been balanced. All they were looking for is your approval. You didn't give them approval, so you waived your right to use the credit. And you didn't even send the statement back. You kept it. So you kept the offer without responding, which meant, I guess, you waived the offer. You sent them a check and the coupon for minus 85.04, and they said, they sent us a liability, and they've already got a liability. Why did they accept your check? Does one debt pay another debt? No. Why did they accept your check?
Because a debt from the United States, or a debt that the United States guarantees, is
better than a debt that you ain't guaranteed.
Exactly.
Okay, so your
Looks much better
deposit
on
in the
books.
bank of the equivalent of Federal Reserve notes, right? Doesn't it say on a Federal Reserve note, this instrument is legal tender for all debts, public or private? But it's evidence of a debt. But who backs that debt?
United States.
United States, okay? Instead of you. And you're a lousy collection compared to the United States, at least so far up until now. Okay? So what they do is they substitute the IOU from the Federal Reserve notes from the United States that's in your checking account. In lieu of your personal liability, they throw the debt on the public. So did you pay your account? No. You moved the debt from yourself in personam to the collection of the people of the United States of America. You moved the debt to the 14th Amendment people.
Oh, you revenued it?
Mm-hmm. So now what happened is the debt for our corporation government went up. You didn't pay it. Your personam debt went down. They're not coming to look for you anymore individually, but if the corporation fails in 2 years, they're going to be looking for everyone, because what you're basically doing when you're using your public account, what are those funds? Insurance proceeds. You're not paying anything. Those are insurance proceeds. What is an insurance proceed? That's when the pool is liable for the individual's debt. So you moved your obligation from you individually to the pool of which you're a member. And the debt of that pool is escalating so fast, it's going to topple this commercial system below this line in 2 years. If you would have set it off by use of your asset, it would have paid your debt, And it would have decreased the liability to the public community, thereby bringing us in harmony so our economy could re-jump and restart. But since everybody is not paying their debts, they're passing it off on the pool. Is that a public benefit? When you pay your debt with your check out of your checking account? It's a public benefit because you're pushing your debt to the public. So as long as you keep paying your debts out of your public checking accounts and out of your public debit cards, you're receiving a public benefit. You can't be a creditor. Double-minded.
But what if you took all deposit slips, all returned canceled checks, all receipts, A for beat 'em with a bond or
Send 'em to
bonded
the
promissory
Treasury.
note, send them to the Treasury with a 1040V to set off any fees, penalties, interest associated with those on everything. Every liability created by your deposits, your checks, purchases would all be set off.
And told the Treasury under HJR 192, tender them dollar for dollar. What just happened? You took it off the public liability system. It's now privatized. Where did those funds come from that the Treasury is using under HJR 192? Alien property custodian. You were issued a Social Security number in the birth certificate. Why was that number issued to you? To what? To identify you for what purpose? To what? It's an account. Why did they need an account? Because they're keeping track of everything you gave them that they owe you. You thought it was for benefits under Social Security. If you're using the cotton picking number to get a benefit, is that a public benefit or a private benefit? Public, making you a slave. Every asset that mom pledged them in that estate, they have been keeping books and records down to the penny, as long as you cooperate with them so their books are accurate, so that they know what they took from you that they owe you back. And they're investing all of that as trustees. And they're making a killing on your investment, which is going back into your account for your benefit. So whereas at the birth they may have placed assets in that account worth about $600,000, by time you were 18 and could collect, you're probably up to several millions. And by time you get older in life and you've gone through some of your commercial years, you got about $3.5 billion easily in your account under your number. And you're going in asking them, oh, pretty please give me a Social Security benefit of $1,000 a month on retirement. Let's see, that's $12,000 to $24,000 a year times 30 years. That's $500,000, and they're holding $3.5 billion. That's just 10% of your account, and they're going to grudgingly pay you $500,000 in retirement benefits, while they're holding on to a private account worth $3.5 billion. More than that. And it's your money. And you're telling the government, set off my utility bill for 80.04. And where's it coming? It's coming out of your account, which is worth billions. You're not stealing from the government. You don't have a clue. Didn't God, leaving his plantation, give talents to each and every one of his servants and said with the talents, go do something. Guess who's got your talents? The international bankers. And why have they got your talents? Because you have been consistently incompetent to handle your own gift from God. When you were 18, you should have went and got it. You didn't. Now that you're much older than that, you still haven't got it. If you die, they terminate your birth certificate, which is the holding in the account. And they turn the birth certificate into what? Death certificate to hold the benefits for you for 3 years to your heirs. And if your heirs don't claim the billions of dollars in your trust fund, in 3 years it cheats permanently to the government. If each and every one of you are worth $3.5 billion dead to the government, does the government have much interest in their new health care system and keeping you alive very much? You're much better off dead to them than alive. Are you beginning to understand what has happened? Only because the servants understand and follow the law better than the masters. Because the masters are so incompetent that the servants of necessity have to treat us like children, keeping our estate away from us to protect us from our own ignorance.
Jack, do we know anybody here, is anybody even trying to claim, obviously all the people have gone through the classes now, somebody and their family's died. I'm just wondering if anybody's...
I think there will be some of those claims going in probably in the next several months from people. If we get rid of that thing there and go back to the three, there you go, DTC, Depository Trust Company. See, the birth certificates generally were held in the counties and then in the states. They used to be transferred to the Department of Commerce, U.S., and that was under the provisions of the Constitution, which required the states to underwrite the federal debts. Okay? Now, since everything is going internationally and the United States is basically a bankrupt nation, has never been operating as a sovereign in any capacity in decades, now what's happened is, see, the DTC, the FRB, and the IRS are all international private organizations. And as such, they're acting as trustees for us. Now, the depository trust is legislative. It keeps all the records of what your estate is worth. That's its purpose. It's on Water Street, Manhattan. And it's not, DTC is not only for America, it's keeping the assets for Canada, Australia, most of Europe. It represents a private security trading corporation which trades in the securities. Isn't your birth certificate a security? What does Scripture say about their buying and selling the souls of man? You just seen it. Because all of those estates represent the gifts God gave you, and they're buying and trading those as securities. That's what the DTC is. DTC is one of the spin-off organizations of the DTCC, which is the parent corporation there. Okay? And they're dealing in securities, so that's where your worth is being stored in accounts. The Federal Reserve Bank is the executive. It portals currency representing your securities. If you sell your securities, then you can either own your body or sell your body for money. If you own your body, in the public, you're a debtor. That's what we've been doing. We want to own our estate. Okay? The trick is, didn't Rockefeller say, own nothing, control everything? Okay? To be in control, it means you got to lend money and put a claim, a lien against it. So you don't want to own your house. You want to loan the money from you as the living man or as that private trust in box 2. You want to loan the money to your straw man in box 6. The straw man in box 6 has a mortgage, but who's he got a mortgage to? the creditor in box 2 who puts a lien on the property.
Couldn't you also gift the beneficial interest to the bank which you loaned the money to?
Mm-hmm.
See, we have this tendency to want to own it, to want it to be in our name. But the moment I signed a promissory note, I loaned money to the bank.
Correct.
What if I gave them the beneficial interest in the house?
They're now the owner.
They're the owner. I control it. I'm the creditor. And I have possession.
But by gifting it the ownership to the bank, basically you've used that so the bank can now cancel out its account for the money that the straw man owes back to the bank. Another way of doing it even better than that is just file a 1099-C and forgive the debt, cancel the debt out to the bank so the bank doesn't have to collect the money from the straw man to pay back the bond to the living man. So, I mean, there's so many things we're learning, and it all comes down to understanding where you are and who you're operating at on this map. Yeah. Let's watch it. A person's a dead thing. Is it person or people you're talking about?
Grab the microphones. Let's grab at least the wireless ones if people aren't.
Yeah, there's one on each stand, too. Especially if the question gets more than 4 words, then everybody's got it.
Yeah, and we just have silence on the audio and the video, because I use the audio recording in the video.
In regards to...
Hold it up a little closer. Good.
In regards to the birth certificate and death certificate, when a person dies, what are the requirements for their heirs to receive or to recoup the...
You got to make an application to the holder of the account. The holder of the account is the DTC. Okay, so you would file an eligibility questionnaire. You would send along with that a payment wizard form, and you would send along the copies of the appropriate documents as the exhibit to apply for that. And what's interesting is if the living man is alive behind the account, so that you're operating on the birth certificate, you got to have original documents certified. If you're operating to collect the funds of a deceased, you don't need certified original documents. All you need is copies. So if your loved one is deceased, you will get a certified copy of a death certificate. You only need to get a Xerox of that. You do not need an original to include with the eligibility questionnaire. Preferably, well, you would need a copy of the death certificate and hopefully another form of identification, which is probably going to be a Social Security card. Now, what you really ought to have is a Social Security card issued after the year 1999, which has the red number on the back. Unfortunately enough, as most people age, the Social Security cards you have in your possession go back to 1901. And they don't have the red number on the back, and if the person himself is not alive to go to Social Security, they generally will not issue you a new card. So if your relatives, friends, whoever it is that you're going to biff off is going to need some kind of estate, make sure they get one of their updated cards as quickly as they can, so you got an updated Social Security card as a form of ID that goes in with that filing.
So if they don't?
I'm not sure. That is a good question. Maybe you could use a birth certificate, even though there's now a death there, as a second form of ID. These are some of the questions we have not yet answered.
Does a person seeking to get the claim have to be in particular status?
Usually probably any of the heirs that are eligible to be in the line per stirpes, which means the state statutes, who is an honest heir that could inherit, would be eligible to do this. Now that leads to a very interesting question, because let's say there's 15 children or something like that, or heirs, and maybe 14 of them are totally ignorant, but you're smart enough to go get this. See, this is private and it's not passing through probate. And the funds that come out of here are not taxable because they're private funds. And we're talking huge amounts of money. So that ought to create a lot of problems in families when they start fighting over it. Because very few people today are honorable. I mean, what has really Brandon been telling us all day? If you're going to do things and be in harmony, you got to be in honor. So let's say you had 14 siblings, but you went out and got mom's estate for $3 billion. The first thing you're going to have to do is watch where you park that funds, because you can't park that money in a standard account in a bank right now, because remember, since the beginning of the year, most banks no longer carry infinite insurance on NIBA accounts. And so you transfer something that's over $250,000 into some of these accounts, and the bank is going to start getting a penalty for holding funds beyond what it's insured for and capable of holding. So you're going to have to watch and understand where you can portal those funds. Okay? Let's say now you portal those funds, and let's say you're an honorable brother and you go, you know, I haven't even told my brothers and sisters, but I'm sitting on mom's $3 billion. What are your duties and obligations as a brother? Share it equally. So are you going to give it to each one of your brothers and sisters? The answer to that question is you got to ask yourself a bunch of questions. Because if you give someone who is incompetent that kind of currency, some people, it'll kill them. A drug dealer will go berserk. He'll be dead in 2 days. So I'm not saying that you've got to grant the funds outright to the brothers and sisters, but what you may have to do is exactly what government has been doing to us.
Create trust.
Create a trust. For what reason? Because government recognizes that most all of us are so stupid and ignorant that $3 billion would kill us. And so they'll hand it out a little bit at a time. Maybe you're going to have to use the wisdom of Solomon and deal with that. And in the meantime, keep your mouth shut and don't even let the brothers and sisters know where the money's coming, because if they did, you would be the worst brother that ever lived for the rest of your life, even though you were doing them a good favor. So, I mean, there is more responsibility for every one of you idiots that came to this weekend. The reason you're idiots is because now that you know the truth, you got to generate responsibility, man, and that's a hell of a lot harder than plain being irresponsible. This is about growing up. And this nation, maybe this world's got 2 years before some serious crap is going to happen. And it's about time somebody steps up and takes responsibility. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about getting you out of your foreclosure. Sure, today that's really important. But if you learned this weekend that you got a minimum of $3 billion that you could toy around with, your only problem is, number one, you weren't aware of it in the history. Number two, you still don't know who you are and why you're entitled to it. But mainly, number three, you have no idea of the paperwork and the process to get it. So it's still a work in process. But maybe if your eyes are beginning to open, can any of you see that it is not an evil creator? For crying out loud, He gave you the talents and the trust. He gave you more than you could ever want. You've only got one problem. You haven't stepped up and gotten responsibility. Didn't He say in Scripture, you've seen me do miracles? It's nothing compared to what you people can do with what I've given you. You weren't aware of what He even gave you.
Another question. Brandon mentioned something about a 1040D or something.
1040 OIDs.
OIDs. Can a person who might have been considered a taxpayer who may have been...
what is a taxpayer?
A person
He's a debtor,
who owes a creditor. So if a person's not a taxpayer, can he somehow file one of those? And
Didn't Brandon say that you, the living man, wrote a promissory note to the bank? So the bank could wash the funds from the private to the public and loan money to your straw man corporation.
okay,
Who's the creditor?
okay.
That's not an okay. Who's the creditor?
The bank is
In which jurisdictional venue?
public.
In the democracy. Who's the creditor in the republic?
I am.
Who was the first creditor, you in the republic or the bank in the democracy? You in the republic. So if you were the first creditor and you loaned $100,000 to the bank, and the bank loaned $100,000 to your corporation, why don't you just tell the damn bank to take my $100,000 and pay off the straw man's $100,000 and we'll call it even?
Okay.
Problem solved. We don't have a problem. All we have is solutions. But you don't know the procedure and the paperwork to do that. We should cover that tomorrow.
Thank you.
Can we go to dinner yet? Oh. How may we help you? Have we generated any other questions since we got 6 or 7 minutes left? See, Gordon, you put them asleep. They don't even have any more questions. What did you do to them?
What would be the best way for me to help a friend of mine pay off his debts when he is too busy and too tied up to come to these classes and look at all this, and besides that, he's skeptical about this in the first place. So there's no way that he's going to come learn about this to do it for himself.
Let me ask you a question. Is he going to be way too busy at the last white throne judgment to appear? Are you going to have to get his ass out of hell too? Or is sooner or later he going to gain, we're talking about what? Responsibility? Does he understand the definition of personal responsibility?
Yeah, he does. He's a highly responsible guy.
I don't think so. He's not responsible enough to help solve his own problems.
I understand where you're coming from, but he has none of this background. He's got about 12 months to finish a PhD program or get thrown out, and it's a PhD in philosophy. Now that's taking more than 100% of his time.
In other words, he's getting a PhD in being a debtor philosophically.
Exactly.
I think he's doing a good job.
Is it?
But anyway, I'd like to help this guy out.
Okay, there is such a thing as brother's keeper. Okay, but sooner or later, as Gordon keeps telling you, how do you get the award? It's based on merit. Does a man who doesn't do anything, doesn't know anything, and won't get involved personally in anything deserve merit?
You know, part of the problem that comes from with setting off some of this debt, and certainly criminal matters and the rest of that, is understanding that contracts are dynamic and they move. The whole game is contracts, so you go in and you set off some debt for somebody, and the creditor, the bank, calls them up and asks them, what is this thing you sent? Or like we had a kind of a fun one before we go would be, maybe we have a gentleman in the audience named Julio from Chicago. He spoke last night in our little dinner thing, and Julio has recently done something with the Attorney General in Illinois. And so he set a contract into motion. And he had an agreement through their tacit acquiescence that he did not need to come to a subpoena, a summons. Generally, if you don't show up to a summons or a subpoena or something without any communication with them, there's going to be an arrest warrant out for you.
Or a hanging.
Julio put into motion this contract wherein he's going to set off this public problem via private administrative process. He made a request to the Attorney General's office. I would like 60 days to resolve this matter on the private side. I'm going to appoint you an appellate review officer for this. And if I don't hear from you, then we've got a deal pursuant to the terms and conditions of this letter. This went out on a Sunday night. Julio was supposed to be there Wednesday. I'll have Julio go. Why don't you go on up over the mic there, Julio? Julio went in and dropped it in the mail on Monday after faxing it to these people, presuming and assuming he's got an automatic abatement, because he said, if I don't hear from you, then it's agreed. And we know we're not going to hear from him, not at least till after the hearing. So at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, Julio had not heard from them. And very nervously, he considered it, okay, I'm hoping I don't get arrested. He was exercising some faith. And about 5 o'clock on Wednesday, the Attorney General's office called him. So, Julio, why don't you give us a rendition real quick of exactly what you did, and then let me explain to you what's going to happen when you try and set something off for your brother.
Well, I was really thinking about using my funds rather than his.
You could, brother's keeper, you could do that.
And what's going to happen when they call your brother and say, what is this thing that was sent here? I don't understand this. This is gibberish.
Well, if I sent it on my account, wouldn't they call me?
Not
No.
necessarily, he's the debtor.
They're gonna
They
call-
might, but they might also call him.
They're going to call him up and say, I tell you what, I need you to send in $10, and you better send it in right now. We've got a guy that's in court over tens and tens of thousands of dollars. It's a divorce case. He sent in they told him they needed $700 for a guardian ad litem to interview him so he can see his child. He sent the check in. He told
Liability money? Right?
regular check.
Okay,
He already
so they sent
in,
him minus 700.00. And in addition to that, the court order said he had to send his wife tens of thousands a month, the kids boku bucks, and everybody else thousands. So he made out an asset instrument for like 3.5 million. But he sent a $700 check for the guardian ad litem. Tell him what the attorney said in the letter.
They basically put him at, he's at risk right now because
Well,
he put in the $700.
But they said, we love your $700. But you're in contempt. You haven't made payments on anything else. Let me get this straight. They sent him liability for $700, and they love that, but they sent him asset for $3.5 million, and they won't even acknowledge they received it. Because where did the asset funds originate in? Above the line. Can they recognize anything above the line openly in public? No, because if they do, they're in treason.
And it didn't come from the court, that comment. It came from the attorney.
They want to
the
see
court.
if he's going to argue. What, didn't you receive my 3.5M?
So, when you're doing something, you're going to be like Julio. Julio made a contract. This guy made a contract, sent $3.5 million in, and then he tells us afterwards that he sent him $700 also.
Oh,
Decided
you're
he's going to send.
double-minded, you idiot. You can't send him liability and asset.
And he moved his contract. Julio, give us a quick rendition of what you did. Wednesday, 5 p.m., we get a call. Julio gets a call from the Attorney General. Hello.
Yeah, I get the phone call, and she says, can I speak to Julio Vargas? I said, how can I help you? She says, well, Mr. Vargas, we had an appointment scheduled at 10 o'clock, and we haven't heard from you. We haven't seen you. You're supposed to be here today. So I asked her, well, did you receive my paperwork that I faxed over to you and sent certified mail? She says, well, I received some papers here, but it's some kind of gibberish, and I don't know what it means, and you were supposed to be here, and I need you to abide by the summons. So I said, well, basically, what I'm asking for, or what I asked for, was an abatement of the proceedings so that I can go ahead and administer a private remedy so I could settle this matter.
Were you making statements or asking questions?
Well, at that point, I was almost making a statement. I was
Okay.
trying to ask a question, but
Okay.
but I'm telling you how I said it because
Right.
I was a little bit. I
It'd
was
have
trying to
been better-
recall what I had learned from
It would have
Gordon.
been better if you'd have said the same thing in the manner of, first you said, did you not get it?
Right.
And then if she said, but you need to be here, but did not my abatement letter request an abatement to not be there?
Right. Well, no. Well, what I asked her was, did you not receive my abatement? And
But then she
so on?
said, but you didn't show up.
Right.
You gotta follow the summons.
Right, and then that's where I kind of made a statement. But then she asked me again. She says, "But Mr. Vargas, you didn't send any documents or anything to that we requested." So I asked her a question. I said, "So are you telling me that I cannot settle this matter privately?" She says, "Mr. Vargas, you need to respond to the summons." I said, "I conditionally accept your offer upon proof of claim that I cannot settle this matter. I cannot settle this in a private administrative process." So she says, "Mr. Vargas, this is not there's no such thing as conditional acceptances. You have to respond to the summons." I said, "So you're telling me that I cannot settle this matter privately? Mr. Vargas, maybe you need to get an attorney to help you explain this process to you." I said, I wanted to conditionally accept again, but I just went back into, so again, I'm going to ask you again. What you're saying is I cannot resolve this problem privately. She says, "Mr. Vargas, you need to respond to the summons." I said, "Ma'am,
You need to respond to my question.
again, I'm asking."
I accept your confession of avoidance as acceptance and approval and agreement that I can settle this in private. Thank you for your time.
That's what I should have done. But I asked her again. I said, "Again, I'm asking the questions. What you're telling me is I can't settle this matter privately." And she says, "Mr. Vargas, you need to respond to the summons." And click, hung up. So I kind of just started laughing because I didn't expect that. And I called Gordon. I said, "Gordon, you're not going to believe what just happened." I told him the story, and one of the points that he brought up, which was very true, and I thought about it later, was it is important not only what she said, but also more important what she didn't say. Because one of the things I know, and just being in law enforcement myself and working with the state and things of that nature, that was a summons. There should have been a warrant issued for my arrest.
Did she mention it?
She never mentioned that a warrant would be issued. She never threatened me with arrest. She didn't. As a matter of fact, she didn't threaten me with anything. She just left it. She stuck on hers, so I got stuck on mine, and that was it. And when she hung up, I kind of made it like a joke. I said, "Hey, Gordon, well, here we go. I'm in it because if they come for me, I'm ready. But I believe that this stuff works. But I'm still ready for the worst." And he says, "Well, you held your mud and you did a good job." So
Yeah, your phone call was the second witness that your contract for abatement was before them, and they did not come back and punish him.
We're going to have a problem with a lot of you creditors that start out with paperwork that you get assistance from us or someone else, and you have good paperwork, and you're going to be your brother's keeper, step in, pay your brother's bill, and what's going to happen? He's going to get a phone call like Julio did. They want a second witness to know whether, if Julio couldn't get me on the phone and say, "Gordon, okay, she said this, now what do I say?" He said, "Okay." No, he has to have, once again, he used 376,000 ways. Jack and Brandon both handled it just differently, they just told him. But did he do good? Absolutely. She deserted the battlefield, but she never threatened him. She just kept saying, "You need to be here." And he kept saying, "Can't I settle this matter privately?" "But you need to be here." "But can't I settle it privately?"
Julio was not saying, "I'm not going to do it." As long as the private side is going to resolve the issue, why is the public going to step in and interfere? And why is the public going to charge him with a contempt when he's doing everything in his power to resolve it? But now see what you're trying to do. You got to go back to the law of creditors and debtors. If a debtor cannot pay his debt, this is back under Exodus in Scripture. If the debtor cannot pay his debt, he can go to a brother or a relative who can pay his debt, and he can ask that brother or relative to pay the debt. If his brother pays the debt, then he is not free of the debt. He just moves from being under the previous creditor to owing his brother, who has now paid the debt for him. Okay? But if your brother, if that's who it is, does not ask you, you cannot go in and just pay that debt.
Because when they call him and they say, what is this stuff? He could say, didn't my brother handle that for me? That would be a question being controlled. Isn't it been handled? Didn't you get paid from my brother? No, let me have my brother call you. I understood he did pay her. You telling me he didn't? No, he didn't. Are you sure? Let me check with him. But at least he would have some basis to have it. If you just go do it because he's negative, doesn't believe.
See, this is the same thing that's happening in Scripture in a spiritual context, because we are unable to pay our debt of sin. Okay? So we go to our brother. Didn't the Messiah say, I'm not your God. I've come here as your brother. And since I am your brother and I can pay your debt under the debtor-creditor laws, you can't pay the debt. Just ask me and I'll pay it for you. Okay, now, you got two witnesses. The first witness is, your brother now has paid your debt. Christ died on the cross. He paid our debts for sin. Okay? Are we now all right? Yeah, no. Because Christ is going to take care of our debt on the private side. Well, where is the public second witness that he's taking care of our debt and is discharged? That isn't coming up until the white throne judgment in the end of the book of Revelation. And we all have to go to that public hearing. And when we go to the public hearing, who is going to be required to stand before the judge and plead the case? Is Jesus going to stand there and plead the case, or are we going to plead the case? We plead the case, and how do we plead the case? Confession and avoidance. I admit the debt. The avoidance is, my brother over here has decided to pay it, and I defer to him as a witness. And the Father then looks at the Son and says, did you agree to pay the debt? And Jesus goes, yep, that's true. And the Father says, debt discharged, case dismissed. He's not going to plead your case. Your brother has to plead the case, even though you are setting off his debt.
We're worried that it will slip because they're going to make a phone call to him. Mm-hmm. He's going to be on the spot and say, I don't know, or just like, we need to break for dinner. We can take this up because we'll get into some more fun subjects and see if we can't spice it up a little bit for you with some of these kinds of stories and with some great examples that might help you understand.
You have the capacity to set off his debt, but he's got to be able to plead his case.
So we're actually coming back at 6 o'clock, or I'm sorry, at 8 o'clock for our evening session. We had planned to do mock trial sessions. If that's the consensus, we will do that. If you wish to do something else, we'll take the consensus of the group and see what you want to do. But either way, back here at 8.